So today's virtual session is really about contextualizing all of the stuff we've already talked about so far in this module. So I'm going to do a little bit of talking about the module in general and what you should be doing and the project and all that stuff. So if you somehow managed to not see that you needed to do pre-work for this virtual session, right now is your opportunity to go into the assignment, open the articles, and at least try to be able to say something about them. Right? But what you're supposed to do is read about lactose intolerance, and we're going to talk specifically about the science behind that in a moment. Before we do that, though, let's look at what's happening basically until we go on vacation. Vacation. So we have just a few things left. Final stretch. Right now we're here, lactose intolerance virtual session. There is a mitosis assignment, a meiosis assignment, and 2 more virtual sessions before the semester ends. And one of them is a discussion-based assessment, right, which is going to be very similar to the last time that we did, where there's just a bunch of questions, and we're going to talk about the ones that you guys want to go over. You're turning in your notes. Remember that notes graphic organizer that you started in the beginning of the module? You're going to turn that in for 50 easy points. And then the Module 3 project, which is worth 200 points. That's a lot. That could make or break your grade. Especially if you have not done anything in the class, that could raise your grade significantly. So make sure you are doing the project. There's not a lot of check-ins for it, right? There's the first check-in. And then next week, most likely next week, I will be sending an email out about individual meetings if you would like to have a meeting with me about your project specifically. But all of these topics that I've given you, right, these collaboration projects, in case you're not sure what we're talking about, all 5 of these options, in my mind, I have an idea of something you could do for that. So if you're completely lost and you're sitting there going, I kind of want to do the first one, but I don't know how to do it. Guess what? I'm here to help you. Right? A lot of you guys who've already turned in which project you want to do, I've sent you links, right? I've sent you websites that might help you. I've sent you project examples potentially of a lab that would model what you're trying to do. Or if you already had an idea, I've tried to help you refine your idea so that it's a little bit more streamlined. So if you are completely lost, let me know and I can send you something that you could do for the project. Right? If you want to be creative and do some cool thing on your own, that's also fine. I only want to help you as much as you need help. Right? I don't want to be like a helicopter parent that's around you all the time like, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? So if you feel confident in the project, I'm going to let you be. If you don't, let me know. Right? And there's no shame. Say, I want to do number 2, but I'm not sure how to do it. Whoop, I'll send you something that would work for you. If you are struggling in this class, I would not choose number 5, right? That's a really, really intense amount of data to deal with. I would also not choose number 4. If you're struggling with the class, I would choose 1 or I would choose 3. Personally, 2 is also a pretty good one. 1, 2, or 3, I will say. Because those are some labs or easier processes that you could model and show. So if you're feeling like, I have no idea what the heck I'm doing, choose options 1, 2, or 3, and then let me know that you don't know what you're doing, and I will help you. If you want to challenge yourself, I would choose 4 or 5, right? 4 is pretty open, and I'm looking for some awesome creativity in that one. Okay, so does anyone have any questions about the project? General questions or specific questions. But if you have one that's like, I want to do this, you should probably just email me that. Okay, the project is due on the 18th, which is also the day that we have a virtual session for our discussion-based assessment. You also will be getting points for doing a gallery walk where you post your project and you comment on other people's projects. That's 250 points. And if you count the notes, 300 points just from doing 3 assignments. And you'll notice most of the assignments in this class are 30 points, 40 points, 50 points, right? So 200 and then the additional 100 from turning in the notes and the gallery walk, that's a lot of points. So you want to make sure that you are getting this project done. Okay, I'll stop talking about the project, even though I just want to keep project. Okay, so on to what we're actually doing today. The pre-work questions that you were supposed to answer. Well, what's going to happen is we're going to go through these questions. You are being graded on a rubric, which I don't think I included the rubric. So I'll set the rubric up while you guys answer the first question. Again, if you didn't do this pre-work yet, open the articles, participate now, right? Remember, if you're in the virtual session and you turn these questions in, you can still get full credit, even if you turn the questions in after. That's fine. So, first of all, who wants to take a educated guess as to why we're talking about lactose intolerance today? Why would we talk about lactose intolerance? Okay, Elizabeth says it applies what we've learned. Georgia says it's related to gene mutations. And Marissa does a little carrot to agree. Yeah, all 3 of you guys are right. Sorry, I was getting my rubric updated. So yeah, this is an example sort of what we've been talking about. We've been talking about all these cell processes, right? They're molecular, they're tiny, they involve a lot of vocab, a lot of steps. They're hard to imagine happening, and also it's hard to imagine why that would even matter to you. Well, this is an example of why it would matter. Lactase is an enzyme, right, that digests lactose. Imagine that. Remember, ACE, A-S-E, very common enzyme naming principle. So lactase is digesting lactose. Guess what? Lactase is an enzyme, which means it's a protein. There's one gene that creates lactase. We've talked about the process, protein synthesis, to create one protein. And knowing how complicated the process is, you can imagine already 50 places where it could go wrong, right? And there are a ton of places that it could go wrong. But in this case, let's talk about what's happening here. So I kind of just gave you the answer to the first question, but which enzyme is affected? Which gene is affected? By the way, I'm writing down everyone who speaks today because you get credit, right, for talking. Even if you're asking a question or you're clarifying something or you're saying, I'm not sure, but I think maybe it's this, right? The purpose here is to try to say something here and contribute to the conversation. All right. MCMY. The enzyme is lactase, and the affected gene is the LCT gene. Okay, so you guys will notice this, especially as you start to actually research, especially if you're doing option 5, Bonnie, and I think Elizabeth chose option 5 as well, if I remember correctly. Genes are usually abbreviated by something related to what they make, right? LCT. Seems oddly to spell lactase, right? Pretty much. So the LCT gene creates lactase, which is a protein, which is an enzyme, which helps digest lactose. Okay. So again, reiterating the point here that one gene makes one protein has a function. Sometimes the function's really obvious, like in this case, it breaks down lactose. Sometimes the function might be less obvious. Okay, so question 2, how does ancestry relate to this condition? Right, so the first article, an evolutionary whodunit article, sort of talks about this in terms of ancestry. So how does ancestry relate to this? We're glad you're here, Lane. We're on question 2 already, talking about the LCT gene. Okay, Michael poses an awesome concept here. Could be something that runs in the family. What makes you say that, Michael? Because you're right. It can run in families, right? Which would relate to your ancestry. Why would it run in families? Bonnie's saying she's confused. We'll come back to that in a second. Okay, so let's see. We got a lot of things going on here. So my question, though, generally to the group is, why would it run in families? Because you're right, it does. Certain regions have a better developed tolerance, okay? Bonnie was confused about Finland because the article said that most countries, but it's also least common in northern countries. Yeah, so again, Bonnie, some of this stuff, which you'll start noticing if you read articles about genes, it's hard to pinpoint these things, right? Because the way people have migrated, the way people have, mated, we don't have like a perfect ancestry line that we can draw. So there could be, confusing information here where some sources might say something that contradicts what another source says. You're going to see that, right? And that's partially because we don't have enough data to know. Let's see, lactose intolerance can be correlated to people who have ancestors that are from certain populations where dairy products were heavily relied on for food. That's an excellent answer there from Georgia, right? People started eating dairy, and if they did that, right, and they were able to survive, because imagine a world where there wasn't a lot of food and dairy was there. Well, if you could eat dairy, good for you, you're surviving. And if you're surviving, you're reproducing. And then we come to my favorite phrase that I will say a million times in this class when we talk about evolution. What do you need to do in order for a trait to continue through a population? You need to survive and reproduce. So if you're able to digest lactose, you're drinking milk, you're eating cheese, you're thriving. Back in the olden days, right, where that was all you were eating and drinking, you have offspring, they have that same ability, right? Everyone's eating well, especially if you have dairy available to you. Yeah, so if you could digest it, you would maybe live longer, or you would have more food sources, so you would probably have a better life. It's because of back then people who weren't tolerant of lactose, but so in other words, they didn't have lactase, would drink it in times of famine, and they would die, right? Or at least be incredibly uncomfortable. But those who could tolerate it would live and pass it on. Good. So Lane basically just said exactly what I just said. Michael is bringing up a great point that it runs in families, right? And this is exactly why. Because it's genetic, right? It's based on a gene. So it definitely can get passed on to offspring, right? And that's how it actually became something in the population. This probably started out as a random mutation, right? A random mutation where suddenly people could either digest, that's one possibility, right? That lactase suddenly became a thing, or the opposite, where there was a mutation where lactase wasn't available anymore. Could be either way, hard to prove. Regardless, there was some kind of mutation, and suddenly some people can digest it and some people can't. Well, guess what? In times of famine and, spoiled food and whatnot, well, guess what? If you could eat more stuff, then good for you. Right? It's sort of like, people who are allergic to things. if you're allergic to a bunch of stuff, it's limiting. You can't eat as many things or, encounter as much stuff if you're allergic to a lot of things. So it's going to limit your life essentially and how many people you interact with and how much thriving you're doing. Okay. Take lactase now. Yes, we'll talk about that. You liked the talking about how it passed. Yeah, so it's interesting, right? And there's a lot of studies on these kinds of things, especially now that stuff like 23andMe and all of these DNA companies are out there, right, where you can have your DNA analyzed. Well, the more DNA they analyze, the more they see these patterns. Where maybe then, Bonnie, they find out that, Finland is an exception or not, or whatever, right? So the more DNA that they have access to, they can build these databases and they can analyze for these types of traits, right? Particularly, we're more interested in diseases usually than this, right? Because being able to digest lactose is, in some ways, a luxury, right? It's not necessary. You can still survive without doing it. All right. So how did this gene to make lactase most likely spread through the population? So we already kind of talked about that, right? In answering question 2, how does ancestry relate? But how do you pass on your genes? Well, you survive and you reproduce. Yeah. So that's interesting, Bonnie. And I would be very interested if you could actually do that gene for your project. I don't know if it's in that database, but you should see, right? Because then you can make it very personal to yourself here. But you guys will find out, right? Genetics is a super interesting field. You will discover stuff about populations that you think, oh, am I included in that? I don't know, right? Or you'll discover things about genes that you can't believe. You can't believe that one mutation, for example, could cause something so severe, or maybe something not severe, right? There's a bunch of variety. Okay, enough about me rambling. Wait till we get to evolution, guys. It's gonna be fun. So why, we didn't really speak on this too much, so maybe we could talk about it a little bit more in depth. What was happening in the world, right, that would cause being able to digest milk to benefit you? An ice age? Sure. Well, not necessarily ice age, but you could think about, well, guess what? There's a huge storm and all your crops got destroyed. Guess you're not eating, right? It's not like you could just go on Amazon and order food. You couldn't go to the store and get food, right? Maybe you could go to your neighbor, but you think they're going to share if they lost stuff too? No. I like that Georgia generalized this to gross stuff. Yeah, right? A lot of disease and famine. Famine meaning that like entire crops are wiped out and there's no food. If there's no food, then you're going to look at some milk and go, you know what? This looks like it's going to be an excellent food source for me because it's there. And also disease, right? And food going bad. Did people know how to store food back then? Did they have the technology to store food? No. Right? People used to rely on farm animals and crops. Exactly, right? And if something happened that ruined your crops, well, I mean, a lot of people died from that. It's a good reproducing source. What is a good reproducing source, Kobe? I'm interested to know what you're in reference to there, right? So part of this is putting yourself back in time. And right now you think, well, dairy, whatever, it's there, right? If I want it. Oh, cows. Yeah. Well, no, you're right. You have a cow, maybe you're using it for meat, but if you all of a sudden could also use the milk from it, that cow becomes a lot more valuable. And then guess what? It's easy to reproduce them, right? So then you have dairy and meat from this cow. That's a big deal, right? It seems you're like, that's a good point, Kobe. People take that for granted because we think, well, duh, milk comes from cows. Well, people didn't always drink that, right? In fact, as you know, some people get sick from drinking it. So, Okay, so how is this disease? I call this a disease. That is general description for gene mutations that cause something to happen to you, it's usually called a disease. Now, would we really consider lactose intolerance a disease? That's arguable, right? I don't think it's necessarily a disease because, again, you can totally have a normal, happy life and have lactose intolerance. It's not impacting your ability to live, at least in modern days. But how would we treat this, or how is it treated? Yeah, one way is by avoiding lactose, right? Sure, just don't have dairy. Problem solved. Now, of course, lactose is not in all dairy. Like a lot of cheese doesn't have lactose in it. But some of it does, right? You would have to like know all that stuff. But avoiding or some pills, yeah. So you can actually take a pill or a little dissolved packet that has lactase in it that you can take when you eat any kind of dairy, and it will help your stomach process it. And I included the National Health, the NIH website, so that you could see it from like a medical perspective versus an evolutionary perspective, because there's many ways to look at this. Okay, so Georgia brings us to our final question, which is it could be treated by gene therapy. So what is gene therapy? And it's not where you go to therapy to talk about your genes, although that would be cool. It's not that. But what is gene therapy? Don't be afraid of Google. They basically take the bad strand of genes and replace it with a good one. Yeah, so modern gene therapy, we got a few like put the gene into your cells, question mark stuff. Yeah, so how do they do that? Well, modern day gene therapy uses viruses for the most part. All right, well, they'll take a virus with the DNA that you want, for example, the gene to make lactase, excuse me. And yes, they will infect you with the virus, right? The virus will then help you create that gene in your body. Now, does this work 100%? It's still a new technology, right? There are some things that it's more successful on than others. And Georgia brought up the point that gene therapy would be a little extensive for this. Do you guys agree with that? Do you disagree? If you are lactose intolerant, like Michael, would you want to go through a process to try to have that gene? Yeah, good. Bonnie's given us a reference here. I don't think it would be wise to do it. It's new and risky and not thoroughly tested. There's plenty of lactose-free foods, right? Exactly. If you want to do it, then have fun. Yeah, right? So in this case, it probably wouldn't be worth it, especially since it's risky. Now, if you could have gene therapy for a disease that you had that was negatively impacting your life to the point where you couldn't live your life, right? That might be something that you would consider. And that's usually when gene therapy comes into play, right? Is for extreme situations where it might benefit you, or at least it would be better than nothing. So our next unit is on genetics. We will talk a little bit about gene therapy in more detail, right? We'll talk about also just like what genetics is and how they predict these things. But we'll talk about ways that genetic diseases are sort of, I guess, dealt with is the best way to say it, right? Because sometimes it's as easy as avoiding something, and sometimes it's not that easy. Also, there's some insane diseases out there. So you guys are going to get to do some research on different diseases, right? So if that's something that's interesting to you, that's coming up in January. But you guys are right. It wouldn't make sense to do it in this case. You just avoid, or you could try the pill, right? See if that helps you. Okay. That was a pretty short and sweet virtual session. These are the people that I wrote down who spoke. Let me know if I missed anyone because we had a lot of people contributing there at once. I got Elizabeth spoke, Marissa, Georgia, Lissa, right? Okay, hope I got that right. Michael, Bonnie, Lane, and Kobe. Those are the people that I had speaking. If I missed you, let me know. Otherwise, what do you submit for this assignment? Oh, thank you, Angela. You did speak. That's fine. Once is the bare minimum. Hopefully you were listening and absorbing. That's important too. Okay, so basically in order to get credit for this virtual session, you're gonna turn in your pre-work, which is your answers to these questions. If you were here, you could have been writing stuff down, which I'm sure a lot of you were, answering the questions. And then I will grade you on this rubric, right? Which is basically, did you talk in the virtual session? In the chat counts. So that's how I'm gonna grade you. If you didn't speak at all in the virtual session, you can still get 15 points just for doing the questions. Okay, so working on your project, start thinking about it, start researching so that you know if you need my help. Right? I'm not going to know if you need my help if you don't tell me. And like I said, I'm not going to give you a ton of information if you don't need it. So figure out what you're going to do, start researching, and if you're like, ooh, I don't know what I'm doing, email me. If you do know what you're doing, but you're starting and you want to just make sure that you're doing the right thing, email me. Right? I love getting emails from you guys. Okay. So otherwise, business as usual. I will see you guys next week where we will, I know everyone's going to be so hyped, revisit statistics. We're going to talk about cancer. We're going to talk about how chi-squared statistics testing can actually be used to determine if someone has cancer. And that's going to be one of the final times we talk about straight up statistics, at least this semester. Okay, so otherwise, if you have a question, right, feel free to email me. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week. We'll review it together, Bonnie, don't even worry. All right, see you guys next week.